This isn't just a financial issue. It's an issue of network integrity. It's a customer service issue. It's really an issue of trust. And increasingly, it's become a cross-border challenge. There's no doubt that fraudsters are getting smarter. They're using spoof caller IDs, deep social engineering tactics, and even AI-generated voices to manipulate victims and bypass traditional safeguards. And while banks and financial institutions are often the targets, it's our infrastructure that's being weaponized, and ultimately, it is the consumer that is oftentimes being victimized. One recent report indicates that carriers lost over $38 billion to fraud in 2023. And in the US, in excess of 136 million robocalls are placed daily. And it is indeed not only a US, but a global problem. So what are we going to get into? Well, we'll look at the latest trends in telephone-based fraud targeting financial institutions. We'll look at unique challenges and vulnerabilities in the Caribbean and US markets. And we'll talk about some strategies for detection, prevention, and customer education. Our goal today is to equip you with insights and tools to better protect your organizations and clients from these deceptive threats. We encourage you to engage actively, ask questions, share experiences, help us to build a stronger, fraud-resilient financial ecosystem. Well, let's dive in. I'm excited and honored to introduce our esteemed group of panelists. Please join me in welcoming Telly Valerie Onu, Delroy McLean, and Michelle Bilton-Smith. If each of you could take a brief moment to introduce yourself, and Michelle, we'll get started with you, then you can hand off to Delroy, and Telly will round things out. I know she was running just a little bit behind. But Michelle, please.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm looking forward to being here today. I've been primarily consulting with the financial industry on understanding their telecom fraud challenges, some of their brand and customer impact, and then also exploring solutions that help combat different telecom fraud like spoofing, brand impersonation, and a broad spectrum of other type of fraudulent activities. I love helping advance enterprise level fraud mitigation and protection solutions, which is why I joined Somos. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Somos since Kevin has this slide up, but we sit in a really unique spot in telecom, and you see kind of two sides split out, where on the left-hand side, we really look at and talk about our registry programs that we run on behalf of the FCC. We do administer and manage 3 different databases on behalf of the FCC. We administer the North American numbering plan, so all +1 phone numbers, toll-free number registry for toll-free phone numbers, and then a database called Reassigned Numbers Database, which houses the disconnected phone numbers from consumers that carriers are required to submit to the R&D. And then from there, we actually built out a commercial arm that really focuses on helping enterprises protect themselves and for consumers from different fraud that might be impacting them. I think we'll talk about a lot of those today. We also look at some routing optimization within the telecom ecosystem, and have over the past several years been really diving into the IoT space, as most of them are rooted in phone numbers and a variety of different factors that are impacting companies alike. So I'll hand it over. I think you said Telly from here?
Please go to Delroy.
Okay, sorry. Handing it over to Delroy.
Hey, morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Michelle. Delroy McLean here. I'm the Vice President of Infrastructure Projects at Proven Wealth. And I've spent now, 35 years in enterprise IT, beginning with rolling out of telecoms and also rolling out major banks. And then having worked for a major telecom for 11 years and now working for a major bank and understand the challenges on both sides. I am deeply focused on how it is that we collaborate to combat the threat of fraud, how it is that we mitigate. Got involved in so much because it actually started with Kevin and DNO, Do Not Originate, some DNO conversations we're having, and just finally seeing the light of day in terms of how it is that we can actually combat this fraud, especially in the Caribbean region where we've got some major gaps there. So this is, I think, my second step on the journey with Kevin and team, on the Somos team, and really excited to share with everyone today. Solution forward, if you will, a solution in terms of how it is that we can actually, talk a little bit less, act a little bit more to close those gaps. So really hoping everyone can chime in as we go through this conversation and help us to solve it together.
Very nice. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Delroy. Not sure if Telly made it.
No.
Okay, so we will we'll press on then. We're going to start, excuse me, the discussion by talking about sort of the landscape and trends that we're seeing. So the initial question I'll ask is, what are the most prevalent types of telecom-based fraud currently affecting financial institutions both in the U.S. and in the Caribbean region? And so maybe we start with Michelle, and then you can build on that, please, Delroy.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting landscape because there's a lot. I've heard the term of if you blow up a balloon and squeeze it in one area, it'll blow up bigger in that, and then if you squeeze that, it'll blow up over here. It's very much like that with the telecom fraud that's hitting the financial networks. I think in the last couple years, we've seen a large investment in different types of solutions and tools that help protect against that. But some of the ones that we've heard most frequently over the last, let's say, year, spoofing by and large, the number one thing that has been talked about, both outbound spoofing of a phone number, of a financial institution's phone number, but also inbound spoofing of consumers' phone numbers that are trying to imitate the consumer from likely gathered information about that consumer and trying to trick the bank into thinking it's them, and then bad things happen from there. We've also seen it hand in hand with spoofing, impersonation, so different brand impersonation tactics, where a spoofer might try and attempt to spoof a call and impersonate the bank at the same time. It's very sophisticated. It's very tricky, and to the very suspicious consumer, it can trick them. In tandem, we've seen a lot of social engineering. So that's when the fraudster has the ability to gather enough information, whether it be through a call, a text, an email, through social media. There's lots of different forms to be able to gather that information. One of the other rising pieces of fraud that we've seen is call forwarding. So where a fraudster will set up a phone number to get call forwarded to get sent to their device or their accounts and phone numbers, and then hijacking happens. I don't know, I hope we get a chance to dive into that a little bit deeper, but I want to give Delroy a chance to continue to add on to what I've kind of level set there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to echo you, Michelle. I mean, spoofing for sure. SIM swapping is really big here as well in the Caribbean.
Yep.
It's the virtual digital man in the middle, if you will. But the Caribbean in general, I think one of the differences is we are a trust-based culture. And so what happens a lot in terms of the spoofing and the SIM swapping is we get calls coming in with an 800 number, and we tend to trust it more. Right? It's an overseas call. It could be a relative, it could be someone else. And so we tend to trust and receive those calls and the callers a little bit more easily. We're also an economy, or economies in transition. So there are a lot more fintechs, a lot more startups with a fragmented, let's say, a regulatory framework around it all. And so from a fraud perspective, social engineering is a big thing, right? So leveraging the trust, leveraging the gaps that we have in the Caribbean, and then using social engineering to just get persons to give up information to get the SIM, the identifier. So to get that call in, to pretend to be the bank itself or the contact center, right? So that's really big here. We also have it on the outgoing side. So that's big for us. And then finally, as you said the spoofing as well. Well, in the Caribbean, we're almost like a transit for spoofing. It's kind of weird. So you have a lot of calls coming in from South America, transiting through the Caribbean, then hitting North America and vice versa. And that also a part of spoofing. But we use all these terms, but the average Joe, the average person doesn't understand what it means or how it applies to them or what really happens. So if I bring it down, it can start with simple things like the WhatsApp, right? Stealing your WhatsApp ID means stealing your identity because it also means stealing your phone number. And then once they have that phone number, it is where the SIM comes in, right? They can again get the bank to redirect the codes to them instead of to you. Call forwarding, as you said, they can do the same thing. Once they have that phone number for a brief moment of time, they take that opportunity to just get everything forwarded to them, get all the approvals forwarded to them. And so social engineering is still very big here. But it's the basic stuff that's been happening for years that continues to plague us day in, day out. But everything you said, Mish, you're spot on. But just think of it on a micro scale in many different countries happening at the same time.
Thank you. Appreciate that. You know, one of the things I've have recently, and being in the industry, I know a little bit about this, so I shouldn't be fooled, right? But I bank with Bank of America. I'll go ahead and put their name out there. And I received a text message that said, "Hey, you made this purchase. Did you approve it?" And you know, my immediate reaction was like, "What is this? $800? I didn't do that, right?" I'm about to hit the button, and I stopped. And I said, "Let me think about this for a second." And I went online, checked my account. I didn't see any activity, right? I mean, they're getting trickier and trickier, and they're really focusing on the emotions, right? Because the initial reaction might be to respond to that. And once you start going down that rabbit hole, you're in deep trouble. So I think hopefully well, not hopefully, I'm sure some folks on the call may have experienced something similar. So we have to constantly be on the watch. Now, you mentioned mobile banking, and in the Caribbean, Delroy, is mobile banking a lot more prevalent than in the U.S.? Is it a primary approach to banking?
It's not a good question. It's not a primary approach to banking, but when we think mobile banking, is more than just the actual act of a typical bank that is replacing brick and mortar with digital. In the Caribbean, there's also remittance, which is very big, bigger than in the US, right? Which is a part of that banking network, if you will. So moving money around either through telecoms primarily, right? So we know we have some large telecoms that facilitate a lot of the remittance services, the actual normal digital banking, but also smaller fintech startups, right? And so it is prevalent as you move from island to island where cash is king still, but convenience is the bigger king. Convenience rules all. And so if you want to get money to relatives far and wide, very, very fast, then that's the way. And that's, boy, Kevin, you hit the nail on the head. That is one of the most common ones here in terms of social engineering. And to steal on your example of that text from the bank, right? We also have the spoofing of bank websites, right? Of Apple's website. So customers will go, okay, I need to, or even the fintech website, I need to send some money, let me log in. They do a Google search, and the first link that pops up, they click on that and say, oh, that's my bank, or that's Apple support. And they click that link, but it's not, it's a spoofed address, right? And so they go in, they share their account details, or worst case, they think they're logging in with their Apple ID, for example, which gives the hacker access to their phone, which gives them access to the SMS and all the codes and everything else. And so what was once convenient now becomes a nightmare of recovery. But that's it. You have a lot of movement of funds going around and lots of different ways to get it done through different banks and fintechs. And so for a malicious hacker, it is ideal. It's ripe for the picking. It's not like you have Bank of America or these major banks that have the majority of the market share. You have those banks here, but when it comes to fintech, there are a lot of smaller operators that are moving funds around in the Caribbean and outside. And so there are lots more ways and avenues for hackers to take advantage of.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned social engineering. What role does that play? You touched on a little bit, both of you, please, in telecom-related financial fraud. And are there things that institutions can do to kind of defend against it?
Yeah, I'll start. So, Delroy, you kind of tapped on it. So did you, Kevin, a little bit. But social engineering really uses like a psychological manipulation to trick victims. And it's oftentimes that they're doing that to reveal certain information, potentially send money. There's phishing, there's false websites, there's business email compromise. I mean, it's everywhere. And so the fraudsters are really leveraging that to tap into our human behaviors like emotions, like urgency, like fear. Curiosity is a big one, right? And that typically is what bypasses any type of rational thinking. So there are lots of different stages that the scammer will tap into. So first, they'll typically appear as someone credible. Then they're going to follow up with some type of initiated contact, and there's different forms, different methods that they can do that. Oftentimes, telecom is being leveraged as one of the more prevalent ones. And then they exploit the victim into doing something and whatever to achieve whatever desired action. A lot of the times it's to reveal some type of PII or do some type of transaction. And then they move on and they do it to the next victim. So it's really hard to protect against that. And I think there's becoming more information. There's more conversation about it. So one of the things that financial institutions can implement or do better is really employee education, having a strong, verification protocol. So putting tools and solutions in place to check if something feels a little bit off, put some tools in place so that you can check and validate. And then having a really strong escalation team and a fraud team to be able to further verify. So, just like we purchase insurance, there are tools and solutions that you can purchase to be able to validate before that fraud, that nightmare that Delroy was explaining happens.
Yeah, similar to just echoing you, Michelle. You're gonna hear that a lot, right?
Or vice
yes,
versa.
vice versa, spot on. There's always almost always an urgency to the social engineering, right? Like click this now, do this now. Here's an SMS. Um, just the other day, just last month, I got an SMS saying my car documents were ready for pickup. Click this link to follow up on where it's at. And I'm like, when did I submit this? Is this a new service? When did this happen? And so I had actually just reached out to them to say, do you have a new service? And they said, yes, we do have a new service, but it doesn't come via SMS. It comes via email. So the hackers, the fraudsters had figured out that there's a new service. Let's just see how many persons know about it. And then they just click through and see it's convenient, right? So there's almost always an urgency to it on one side. When it comes to the enterprise side, what I've seen as well is they've injected themselves legitimately into email threads or into the organization. So they come in pretending to be a customer, requesting to make legit transfers or to do a legit transaction. And then they gather the email addresses of different persons within the org, right? And as the thread continues and grows, they then copy someone else in who then mimics the name of someone legit in the organization to approve a transaction to a fraudulent account, right? Leveraging, again, the telco background, because sometimes they have the code, sometimes they have the SMS, sometimes they have that phone in the middle to say, hey, I can approve it via the transaction, send it here. And for some strange reason, lots of banks are still using SMS as the key validator. Not sure why. But yeah, there's a short game for the individual, but there's the long game as well for the enterprises. And they're all still prevalent. They're all still a challenge.
Okay, thank you both. Appreciate that. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about regulatory and legal framework just a little bit. And this time we're going to start with you, Delroy. I know that there's a challenge in the region with so many independent regulatory organizations. Are there effective regulations to combat any of this for the region, or do some individual countries stand out as being effective, more effective than others?
Good question. You put me in trouble there by saying some countries. Remember, I live here, right?
Okay,
I don't want to get in trouble.
scratch that.
I see someone in the chat here from Trinidad. I don't want to get any trouble with Trinidad, right? I'm in Jamaica here. But to be honest, I do not see a challenge on the regulatory side. Even though we have differences, a lot of our regulations are pretty similar. They follow some standard, global standards typically, with just a localized implementation. And so I think regulatory-wise, we're solid. But remember that the regulation is not intended, or regulations are not really intended to combat, right, fraud. They're needed to assist. So where I see regulations could help us across the board is in terms of how it is that we prosecute, maybe. I don't think we need regulations to collaborate around that, but we do need regulations to help to ensure that once a crime is committed, we can proceed it all the way to the end. That's ensuring that we have the courts and everyone lined up. But regulatory-wise, we're pretty solid. I know, for example, in Cayman, where we have SEMA, in Jamaica, where we have the BOJ here, they are pretty stringent, and they have the auditors that go through monthly, etc. But they are designed to catch so many things. If you're a regulator, if you're looking at policy, it is all-encompassing, all-day, 24/7 job, just to go through what you implement, what you measure or audit, and then what you enforce. And there's a cost to that, especially for smaller nations and smaller financial firms. It's really, really big. So for the banks, we're good. For the fintech, we have much less stringent. I mean, there's not much in terms of regulation there. There's a framework, but not much in terms of enforcement on the fintech side. And so fintechs have a lot more flexibility, but they're also riding a typical banking framework as well, right? So they can come in as on top of sponsors or other banks to say, hey, here's just an access to our portal in. But it's really complex, guys. I can't count how many we have, and then how many you have to measure and hold to account. So instead of looking at the regulations, I think we need to all just agree that here's a framework, and then work from there out. Because for every country, for every market within the Caribbean, they're going to want to have their own ownership, right? Your own responsibilities, and you'll never get rid of that. So there's no standardization across the region in terms of everyone doing the same thing. It's not going to happen.
Appreciate that. Well, what about you, Michelle? Do you feel that the regulations in the U.S. are doing a good job at least starting to curb this telecom related fraud?
Yeah, I think starting is a good word for it. I think there's still a long way to go. Like Delroy, I think it's really, really refreshing to see the collaboration between, industry and telecom, and really a voice to be able to talk and share specific information. There are some regulatory restrictions on what information can be shared between different types of entities, at least in the US. But we have seen the enforcement and the adoption of DNO. I think Delroy kind of talked about that a tiny bit at the beginning of this, but do not originate is a very powerful tool that can be leveraged and has been adopted from a regulatory standpoint by the FCC. And it's getting a little bit more strict every year. We have an enforcement date that's coming up in December for all carriers in the call path to leverage a DNO database to block traffic from any calls that are originating on it. So we've seen adoption of that. Now there's a little bit more enforcement. That's a really good place to start, right? That's where we kind of use that starting point to weed out some of the traffic.
So
That
Michelle,
said,
let me stop you there just for a second, because some of the
yeah,
audience may not have a understanding of DNO, just like from a high level.
yeah.
What does it do? How does it cut down on fraudulent calls?
So DNO stands for do not originate, and it's exactly as it says. So a phone number can have a DNO status on it. which indicates that it should never originate call traffic. And so originally, when this was implemented in the FCC, it was on international gateway providers for any traffic coming into the US that they had to leverage a DNO database to block traffic from the phone numbers on there. So we're talking things like phone numbers that are manually set by a bank, right? If they've got a phone number on the back of their credit card that they would never originate any traffic on, they can leverage that DNO status to protect the phone number on the carrier networks. So any phone number that hasn't been allocated, hasn't been assigned, these are phone numbers that are on the DNO database. To give you an idea of what that looks like, we see about 10 billion phone numbers in the US, and 6 billion of those should never originate traffic. It's a big portion of it. So, there's some enforcement there. We've seen it. I don't know if you're going to talk about Europe a little bit, but we've seen adoption of that within Europe. We're seeing countries start to adopt that methodology in their telecom ecosystem. So, that's one place, like I said, is a starting point. There's still a lot of spoofing that's happening on very legitimate phone numbers that have been allocated, that have been assigned, that would not be listed as DNO. So how do we regulate that, and how do we stop it? So I think a lot of the work that we're doing at Somos from the standpoint of protecting phone numbers and the traffic on it, we're really working towards being able to provide a solution out there, but also help regulation along the way to hopefully put some enforcement in place on protecting, the ecosystem from those spoofing scenarios. So hopefully that answered what you were saying,
Yeah,
Kevin.
definitely. So let me ask you a question. In terms of DNO, is that something that you could build a regional database or a base for individual countries? Is it only for carriers, or do other entities use DNO as well?
At least in the US, the adoption was primarily at the carrier and service provider level, and it was primarily because there was regulation and enforcement in place, and there was a movement to stop some of the traffic on the DNO phone number. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can be regional. In Europe, we see that it's by country. Ireland has its own list. The UK has its own list. So we're starting to see that adoption a little bit more frequently. It would be fantastic if we could get a global DNO database where everybody's using that same list to filter, because like Delroy, right? You might be a transit carrier. We want that database to be free or consistent from each country to country, but we're very far from that. I don't know if we're ever going to reach it, but that would be an ideal state.
Thank you. So, in terms of the US market, I know that regulators are pushing for things like stronger cross-sector collaboration. You touched on that a little bit, consumer education, real-time fraud reporting mechanisms. Is there anything either one of you can share about those particular areas?
Yeah, so I've seen education. So I actually was at a webinar, or not a webinar, sorry, a conference earlier this year, and was on a panel with someone who I had a chance to speak with before in preparation. And they had implemented an entire incentivized fraud program within their financial institution. And this was primarily for the frontline, tellers and bankers that are in the retail banking space, where they trained them on different methods to be able to spot indications of fraud, to be able to understand what smoke signals might be occurring, and incentivizing them to bring that to a reporting internally, and investigating that. And then there would be some incentive and reward for, most amount of submittals, right? So that's one instance, but there's lots of tools and resources from a technology standpoint that can help solve for some of it, just as much as the fraud is rampant. There's lots of tools and resources that also leave open vulnerabilities and risks and opportunity for the cyber criminals as well. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it, but really understanding the risk of your business, the risk of your consumers, and what you're willing to tolerate, and making decisions based off of that. So if if you're happy, if you want to discuss any further, anyone kind of attending this and want to consult on what might be best for you, I'm happy to take it offline, and we'll have some open time for Q&A as well.
Similar, Mish, for the education, I mean, I'm not downplaying education. I have to do my cybersecurity test every 30 to 60 days. We all have that on the enterprise side. Education is key, but it only takes us so far, especially when we get down to the individual users, right? Because every hacker knows they're not looking for the enterprise with the strongest security or the most educated. They're looking for the weakest link. And so if on the telco side, you're not training the staff to fully understand that call fraud, the impersonation, using AI to impersonate someone, or pretending to have lost your phone and needing a new SIM, stuff like that. If that isn't consistent, because their staff changes, right? It's a very big mountain to climb every day, day in, day out. So the education is one thing. But stepping back to DNO and tools like those, it is DNO effectively builds a blacklist. Is how do we build the whitelist as well, right? Which is what it's doing. Effectively, it's just going to end. If we get to the ideal word, Michelle, that's where we'll end up, right? The whitelist instead of the blacklist. It's how it is that we can collaborate on the tabletop exercises as organizations, as enterprises, as groups like CANTO, right? That type of education. If we have a CANTO where we've got the telcos, we've got the banks, we've got the fintechs, we've got the regulatory, and finally we've got the judicial / enforcement arms, then we have the ideal room of people for a tabletop exercise and planning and executing. That is, we're not there to sell. We're not there to say, hey, here's what I achieved this year. We're all there together at CANTO saying, here's how it is that we can educate each other, what we're seeing trend-wise or breach-wise, or just like what we're talking here. So from an education perspective, that's what's really needed. And then driving that down or back through the organizations to say, hey, your staff needs to be aware of this specifically to your industry, right? Because they can't know it all. So let's get it very specific to your industry, because we've seen these trends. Here's the vector. You train your team on this, I'll train my team on that. And then we cross-pollinate as best as we can. But education is always going to be the key. It's how we do it in a more structured way, right? Instead of this broad brush. For a bank, it's very broad brush. Having gone through some of them, it's very, know all these things, but you still don't know the core, 90% of it, right? They throw all this high level stuff, but 90% of it is what you're gonna miss. And that's critical. So maybe also building that framework around education, right? How it is that we bring people up to speed as their attacks and vectors change.
That's great.
Can
Appreciate
I add something on that,
Please.
Kevin?
Please, Michelle.
Yeah, so SOMAS is a part of a few different groups and organizations in the US, and what I've seen them do very well, exactly like Delroy said, if you can bring all of those parties in one place, it's not to sell, it's to really advocate on behalf of the humanity ecosystem and the telecom networks that support it. And what I've seen really done well over the last couple of years is that collaboration and education piece. But part of that collaborating is to make something a little bit more visible to a larger audience. So for example, a fraud reporting form in one of the groups that we are associated with, that exact example, Kevin, of you get that text that says, did you spend, $272 at your bank? If so, press yes or no, or, whatever the action, call back this number, whatever that action is. Once those reports started to be shared on this open forum, more came. more came. Everybody started sharing and saying, we've got a big problem here, which opened up a case, and some, prosecution and investigation is happening right now. So I think the more that we can share those examples and kind of band together, I think is where we're going to see a lot of the results and potentially regulation and enforcement, which in most cases with fraud will help a lot. So I think if we can be open to that, but also coming in as a united front, that's where I've seen work very well with some of the industry sharing groups. So I don't know, does Canto have an open forum to be able to share that? Because if not, I would say that's a great idea for implementing.
Yeah, we're Caribbean, we're an open community, right?
Right, right.
So-
But the transparency of those different reports coming in and being able to see them at the frequency.
I would throw it back out to Somos as a challenge to say, make it happen.
Yeah.
You're in a unique position where you've got the backers behind the Canto, the team at Canto. This is what they're looking for, consistent collaboration. That's the point, right? It's not just for telcos. And it's good to learn from other markets, good to see the best of the best. And yes, you've got different sides of Canto in terms of the regulatory, the dignitary, the whatever it is. But for the technocrats at the event, that would be an absolutely awesome thing to happen, right? And just to kickstart that would be the spark that says, hey, how do we do this again at the smaller scale in my market or in my region? How do I take in the lesser entities or the greater entities? I think we just need to start and get some people on stage, and that's what Canto is all about.
It's great. Great discussion. Now, Michelle, I'm thinking about CFCA. Is that open to other countries? Is it, or could they perhaps develop a Caribbean, organization that's part of CFCA? Do you know?
I don't have the direct answer to that, but it's something that I'm happy to raise up and get the conversation going.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, because oh, go ahead.
The
Go ahead,
regulations and the framework from the CFCA also applies here.
Yeah.
That helps. So yeah, that's actually good. So GSMA, ITU, CSMA, CFSA, from a framework perspective, these global standards and frameworks are what are used to create our own laws and regulatory guidelines, right? So we already have that thread or that framework that we need as different countries or different markets to execute on the collaboration.
Yeah. I hear an action item.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It looks like Telly has been able to join us. I know she was having some connectivity issues. Thank you, Telly. Appreciate you joining. If you just want to take just a minute or so to just tell us a little bit about your background and, how you're sort of engaged in this activity, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Apologies for the late connectivity. You know how it is, technology. Anyway, my name is Telly Valerie Onu. I am from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I live in St. Kitts and Nevis in the Eastern Caribbean. I have a multidisciplinary background. Been a management consultant for over 24 years, had slowly transitioned into finance. I'm also a private banker. I work in the space of private equity, and I'm also doing some work with some family offices. And my background is in electronic governance, so I tend to kind of blend between digital as well as finance and all in between. So you'd find me involved in looking at infrastructure. So I have a heavy background in building digital infrastructure, especially payment rails. I'm the head of governance and execution as well for Interstellar. And we had just built in partnership with the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System African Currency Marketplace. So that was just launched, and I've been involved in many other things. I'm also a co-founder for a private neobank called Pay Nomad Capital. And of course, in that context, I am quite responsible for systems architecture, infrastructure design, etc. And I wear all these other hats in the tech space as well. So
Okay, appreciate that.
I'm a
Thank you for
serial entrepreneur. I can't help it.
very nice, very nice. Appreciate that. So let's see, where were we? We were talking about, I think I want to talk a little bit about how technology is impacting this fraud, and then also maybe how it can be utilized to combat it, especially AI. We can't have any conversations without a discussion around AI, right? It's not allowed. I think it's against the law. But anyway, are there ways that AI is making this more challenging? And conversely, are there ways that we can utilize AI to combat the scourge? And that's open to anybody who feels like jumping in.
I'll jump in. Well, of course, AI is going to make it more challenging at first, right? There's that aspect of impersonation. It allows, you can have your offline, you can build your own models, your own LLMs on a small device that costs less than $100. So it allows hackers to identify vulnerabilities a lot faster, or fastest route to processing a list. So if you take, for example, there was a large breach of LastPass passwords, like 2023, years ago, right? And then hackers have been exploiting that list offline for years. And now there are new breaches coming out of that breach, because now they're using AI to accelerate connecting the dots between which account is where, which password is being used across multiple accounts, etc. So we do have that scale of AI to deal with. On the flip side, we can also use AI in the exact same way, but to collaborate, right? To better identify trends without sharing data. Kevin, you touched on earlier that, or what was it, Michelle? The regulations, yeah, actually, Michelle, you said the regulations actually can impede data sharing, which we know. Data Protection Act in Jamaica, GDPR in Europe, those can restrict data sharing, specific data, but they don't prevent generalized, right? Information instead of data itself. And so we can leverage AI to build information, to show trends, to share it real time, almost, so that we can respond in kind. And so we could have a breach in the US or in Jamaica, that in Barbados or in St. Vincent or Trinidad, they can take that same pattern, load it up on their side, and get to the same conclusion with the same hacker, right? So we have to leverage it. We have to know that they're using, but we have to leverage it as well. That's what I see.
I could add to that to say that you can't do anything without AI, because AI is about data. And as Delroy just mentioned, the negative, or those mal individuals, have access to the same AI tools. So we have to try and get ahead of the game, be smarter, faster, but also it's also important to do some public education, because people are just not aware, On the one hand, you have cases whereby persons cannot necessarily even recognize when social engineering is happening. So if we are to leverage AI, part of that will be, how do we now use AI to kind of identify social engineering? And I think there's opportunity to create more products for end users where they can pretty much identify the social engineering hacks. Other things that I think is also critically important is the ability for us to kind of incorporate cybersecurity, whether it's on all our devices, and have it connect with AI. Back in the day, at one point in time, I did ethical hacking. And I was always fascinated with cybersecurity and, the fact that they do penetration testing. And I always would say, well, it's like you're in a house with all your doors locked and closed, but there's a window open. So to what extent is penetration testing good? What's important is to be able to then have a scan to see if there's any entrant anomaly. And now we have the tools and the technology to do that. So I think it's kind of really important, but I think there's also an opportunity for a lot more products, with a lot more AI products, especially for mobile devices. I think that's going to be critical and key, and especially connected to social media as well, because you have now deep fakes, and unfortunately, they're using social engineering for deep fakes. They could record you on a call, just like we're having this webinar, we could be recorded right now. And in less than a few hours, they can have your voice patterns and everything. So we have to be more vigilant, and we do have to invest in a lot more research and development to try and get ahead of the game. On a finance perspective, or from a bank perspective, the way we would generally use it is, for implementing AML procedure, anti-money laundering, and that requires monitoring. So you find there's so many tools now that allow you to really monitor accounts and even monitor behavior patterns. And with sentiment analysis, you can actually kind of detect some of these patterns when you're talking to someone or something. So I think these are ways we can incorporate AI, definitely.
Very nice. Thank you. I appreciate that. You know what? We probably want to take a few minutes here to take a look at the questions and see if we can respond. Where would I see those? I can't even see my chat. Oh, wait. Never mind. I see it now. All right. Let's see. We have one from Edward. He says, as a financial institution in Trinidad, we're seeing frequent smishing attacks from local numbers targeting online banking customers. These numbers are often reused and even used to call customers directly. How can CANTO work with telecom regulators and providers to strengthen customer onboarding and improve monitoring of SMS activity to detect and block such fraudulent behavior?
So as a former operator, let me apologize to Edward. I've been in a few of those meetings where the banks have called and they're like, here are these numbers, please investigate. The truth of it is, right, from a systems and cost perspective, it's very time consuming and very costly to investigate every number that a bank throws at you. And then from what you can share about the number, it's also very restrictive. So to what Michelle and I discussed earlier, and to touch on it, is even if we know what's behind the number, we can't share that detail back with the bank, right? And then regulatory-wise, we can't disconnect the number unless the person says, unless it's clear fraud, or the person says, please disconnect me. However, what we can do if we had the tools would be to look at the trends, the calls originating from those numbers, and proactively disconnect. So it's not so much CANTO. I really think we go back to the conversation we're having on DNO, right, which allows for immediate identification, near real-time identification of these numbers. And that's instantaneous. That removes the need for a bank and a telco to sit on a call for weeks at a time trying to shut down a number. Right, that's the honest truth. But we would have, how CANTO can help is to encourage the telcos and the banks to find these tools or to leverage these tools as a collaboration mean, rather than saying, okay, we need to write new laws or we need to write new procedures. What are the tools that allow us to collaborate without having, with the existing laws and regulations we have? Because the need is now. The need isn't when everything is ratified. The need is now. And so if, as a telco operator, if I had that tool back then, it would have been way easier. But if I have to do the investigation, it includes calling my fraud team, getting the team to the number tracking, the number tracing, checking the most recent calls because you're not looking with that far back. And so it's time consuming. Let's get the tools.
Okay, thank you. Let me go to this next question here. It's from Kevin Nelson, eBodyguard. It says, if 6 billion numbers should not originate traffic, how and why are they enabled or allowed to do so? This certainly shows my lack of understanding of the DNO infrastructure. So maybe, Michelle, you want to take a swing at that one?
Yeah, so DNO is is a is a status that can be put on a phone number. It can be so a phone number that doesn't have a DNO status, that haven't been on or that haven't been allocated, they haven't been assigned, can still make traffic, meaning that the phone number is likely getting spoofed by this, cyber criminal, fraudster, whoever's actually making attempts on that phone number. So it's a clear sign of spoofing if there is traffic being originated on a phone number. The problem is um, the phone number has to have the DNO status active and turned on with the phone number, or from the at least in the US, it's different in different countries, but from the phone number, or the company that procured the phone number from the registry. So that is the ultimate person that can turn on or off DNO statuses. So if it is not on a DNO status, then it would not be blocked, and it can originate traffic, and it's likely by someone who shouldn't be originating traffic on it. There's also a little bit of another gap there. Yes, there is enforcement. Yes, there is some regulation in the US for DNO. However, the gap is in where the DNO lies. There is not one centralized DNO database that is required for all carriers to leverage. They've kept it a little bit general in nature, where they call it, the enforcement says a reasonable DNO list, which leaves it open to interpretation. So there are other databases out there that can be leveraged, but they're very small, or they might not have live active information, where they might be blocking traffic on a phone number that actually now has been allocated, and vice versa. So hopefully that answers the Kevin's question.
I think so. I mean, ultimately, it's up to the carrier, though, right? The carrier is the one who is going to take that action to block that call based on that DNO list. Is that correct?
Well, the action, yes, the blocking is on the carriers, but the getting the phone number onto that DNO list is a whole different thing. We manage a massive database of DNO, one of the most comprehensive, and because we know when phone numbers have been procured and allocated, like those are things that we can update on a very frequent basis. We've seen up to 70,000 changes in a DNO phone number status in a day. So sometimes there are vendors out there that might sell a DNO list to a carrier, but it's not as up to date, not as active as it should be, and that is one of the biggest gaps that we see today. So yeah, happy to talk about that in more detail, but I know we've only got 6 more minutes left, so I want to make sure we answer other questions.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's actually the last one I see in the chat. If anybody has anything else, shoot it over
Well,
very
I
quick.
just wanted to
Oh, please, Telly.
address Andrea's query in terms of CANTO. I mean, I think what is needed is really to focus on threat intelligence holistically. And there is an opportunity for collaboration. I just finished a project in Trinidad and Tobago, really looking at the whole innovation ecosystem. And when you look at the opportunity for cyber solutions, it's a very clear opportunity. But what is required is you need to collaborate. And a lot of times, all these agencies, banks, telecoms operate in silos. So here's an opportunity where maybe CANTO, as a convener or a champion, could facilitate and create a kind of regional threat intelligence platform and work along with the banks and the telcos to kind of have these coordinated responses. Because you're trying to do it with your own institution, it's going to cost a lot of money. It requires a more regional and coordinated response. And a lot of times, everyone keeps quiet when these things are happening. The fact that you can actually ask the question about what is happening is very key, because there are many financial institutions that keep quiet when these things are happening. So definitely for me is that regional threat intelligence should be something like a sharing platform should be something we should work towards. It's not something one entity can do alone.
Yeah, very good recommendation. Appreciate that. Let's see, we have one more question here from Roma Paul. I'd say it's well more of a statement, I think. You may have legislation, but there are gaps. People operate in silos. Implementation is a challenge, among other things. Totally agreed. It really aligns with, and education is critical.
Yeah.
Agree with all of that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But that's the reason why a regional or regional law won't work. Will never happen. It's going to take too long, right? Collaboration is the key, as Telly just said. And we don't need new laws to collaborate. We honestly don't. All it takes is for us to understand what we can share, right? Allow every country to have their own model, which is the federated way to do it, which is what we do in finance, which is what we already do in telco today. But all these models are already based on a framework. All these regulations are already based on the framework. So if we know the frameworks, collaborate using the framework as a thread, and it will happen. Education is definitely the key. Education also answers Edward's other question on related to DNO as well. If you are a company that has traffic, you want to know if you're being spoofed, you got to measure or track your own traffic. Pay attention to your phone bills, right? There's a lot you can do. I mean, and there's AI to help with that. So you don't even have to go through line by line. So it all comes through collaboration. What we're doing here is really what facilitates the solution. This collaboration and sharing information is where we start.
Yeah, and I would say to really quick to add to that, in the US, one of the things that we're seeing is really the banks, credit unions, fintech kind of banding together to really push this narrative to telecom and primarily the FCC to say we need to do something about spoofing because what is happening today and the options available today are A, too expensive, and B, we didn't make the traffic, so why do we have to pay for it? So I think there's this narrative that now the banks are really banding together and collaborating and sharing these stories so that they can actually make some change. It's not overnight. It's a marathon, an ultra marathon, but I will say it's a place to start. It's a place to continue to evolve in, and everyone will benefit from it in the long run. So I think we all agree on that.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. We're just about out of time, so I got to wrap this up. Appreciate our speakers, appreciate the participants for contributing to such a rich and timely discussion. We thank the audience really for spending your precious time with us. So what we heard today is clear. Telephone-based fraud is not just a financial sector issue. It's a telecom infrastructure issue. It's a regulatory challenge. It's a crisis of trust. And so tackling it will require all to work together, regulators, operators, financial institutions across borders and technologies to really impact this problem. So before we wrap up today's session, I'd like to share a few quick announcements on behalf of Canto. Our next major event will be Canto Connect and 41st AGM 2026. It'll be taking place February 1st through the 3rd, 2026 at the Hyatt Regency Trinidad and Tobago. Join us for 3 days of a high-level dialogue, innovation, and networking with ICT leaders, policymakers, and digital innovators from across the region. Also, this was our final Canto Conversations for the 2025 calendar year. We want to thank all of our speakers, moderators, and participants who made this series such a success. Stay tuned to Canto's website, email, and social media pages for announcements on when we'll resume our conversations in 2026 with another exciting lineup of topics and guest experts. So we want to thank you again, and we wish all of you going into a new year. We're a little bit away, but we wish you the best over the next few months and into the new year. If you need to contact someone from Somos, you can contact me directly. I'll put you in contact with Michelle and the team, and we'll be off and running. So Thank you again. Thanks, Canto. And this will end the event. Take care, guys.